might as well just start right off with gold and silver. We're seeing fluctuations in gold. I mean, since December, gold was like around 1,050, and now we're at 13 and change. Some people are out there saying that gold is going to be going down below 1,000. Other people are saying it's going to go much, much higher. What is your view on what gold and silver are going to do from this point on?
Well, I think one thing we all have to remember is that it's not a freely traded market. It hasn't been a freely traded market since the 1960s, since the introduction of computers into the trading, our free market system. So I go a lot into the history of computer manipulation and computer rigging by the Fed, the Treasury, and the big bullion banks. It goes back to the 60s and 70s when we went off the gold standard. And the only reason the unbacked fiat system has lasted so long is because of the control of the gold and silver prices by those behind the scenes. And it's really easy to rig the markets if you have unlimited funds and you have the support of the SEC and the CFTC, which are the regulators in the United States. So that's what happened, has happened to our system, is that everything's been under the control of the manipulation by the Fed and the U.S. Treasury since the 60s and 70s. So you look at the prices today, and why does the price of silver go up or down, and why does the price of gold go up and down? It's got nothing to do with people buying and selling physical. It's got to do with where they, meaning the manipulators, our lovely government and the regulators, where they want it to go and where they need it to go to maintain the status quo and keep the system going. And it hasn't been traded freely since, that's over 40 years. So yeah, they'll put it where they want to put it. With a click of the mouse, they can put gold and silver to $0 per ounce, or they can put it to $1 million per ounce. That's how easy it is. But I do believe that we are approaching that time when this manipulation and the control over our markets and our lives is going to end. So yeah, I see it as a great time. Ultimately, a high silver price would destroy all the banks of the world, the large bullion banks, which will take down every other bank. So when they are ready to do it, and I believe the United States is just about there, because we are the largest debtor nation, and there would be nothing better for the United States than to destroy the system. And they can do that easily with, putting the price of silver at $100 or $200 or $300, which kicks off the derivative implosion through JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank. And then that would cover every other bank too, because they're all interconnected.
When you talk about manipulation, I know you talked about click of a mouse, but can you just, from your research and everything that you've looked at, can you just give like an example of how they actually manipulate the gold silver market? Like, what do they actually do to manipulate it?
Well, it's the price of gold and silver, of physical gold and silver, is determined on basically two markets right now, almost three, but two, and that's the COMEX, that's a futures and options market in the United States. And the way it happens is they throw 1 million ounces. Well, it's actually over 100 billion ounces yearly trading volume on the COMEX. But it's not real silver, and there's a delivery component, but it's very rare that people take delivery of the silver. And it's basically the bullion banks, the large banks like HSBC and JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank, trading back and forth to each other as they're told on these markets. And the other large market is the LBMA, which is another electronic market in London. And if you look at just the silver side of it, every year about 900 to 1 billion ounces of silver comes onto the market, new silver or recycled silver. But when you look at the 100 billion or 1 billion ounces of physical metal, over 100 billion are traded on the COMEX, and then there's even more than that traded on the LBMA exchange. So you wonder, all right, is this what is really being traded here to determine price? Is it the metal, or is it electronic promises of the metal being traded back and forth from these banks to control the price? I would say about 95 to 98% of all trades is just a handful of banks trading back and forth with each other to create an artificial price. Now, the Shanghai Gold Exchange and the Shanghai Silver Future Market is kind of a new entrance to the system, and more emphasis is being put on that, which would be great. It's still an electronic exchange, and people think, oh, no, that's the real thing. It's not. It's electronic promises going back and forth, but there's more of a delivery component because in China and in Asia, there's more of an attachment to physical metal as a form of wealth than there is in the United States. So that's how the price is determined. It's determined on the electronic exchanges, futures and options. And these large players, there's probably a handful of them, 15 to 20 of them, all working together through the support and encouragement of the U.S. government and the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which was set up to rig these markets. 100% legal, 100% the plan, and then the only way you can run an unbacked system is to control the price of commodities and control the price of the U.S. dollar, which is also traded on these same exchanges, the electronic exchanges. So yeah, it's pretty easy to do. If you have control of a computer, you can click a mouse, and you have the regulators protecting you as you do this.
So when they do this and they continually have this, trading electronically going back and forth, what is the volume of actual people buying, selling the precious metal?
Well, there's a lot of players in the market, but there are only a few dominant players that take up, like I said, 95% or so of the trades. And those dominant players are carefully controlled and orchestrated from behind the scenes from the people controlling the price. And we've seen it time and time again. GATA has proved it many times that these people collude with each other for various reasons. And there's a base manipulation, which is the control of the system overall that the Fed and the Treasury watches over. And then there's individual manipulations that happen where, JP Morgan wants to make a lot of money, so they'll contact a few of their buddies and say, hey, we got an operation to do, which happened in 2011 when they brought the price of silver up from $25 to $50 in the first 3 months of the year, by placing one of their top executives as the chief of staff for Obama. With William Daley, and he was known as Jamie Dimon's economic, not an economic hitman, but he was the head of the SWAT team, is what Jamie Dimon called him at JP Morgan. And they had a problem with their silver book, so he was placed as the chief of staff for Obama for 1 year, and during that year, he brought up the price of silver from 25 to 50, and everybody, all the weak hands, all the little guys got in, getting all excited. And then they slammed it down fairly easily, dumping a billion ounces of electronic silver on the market on, what was it, May 1st, I think it was, on a Sunday night. And you can do that when you control the mechanisms for the market and get the regulators on your side, and you have the government on your side and the U.S. Treasury. It was all planned and it was all orchestrated. And then when the year was up, silver ended up closing right around $25 again, just like it started in the beginning of the year. And then Bill Daley quit as Obama's chief of staff, job done, walk away, and then you go on to the next manipulation.
So there's many people out there saying that there's a huge shortage of silver. We see the ratio of gold to silver right now is way off. Is there a huge shortage of silver? And why, two questions here, why is the ratio so off?
Well, I think it's important to understand that in a free market, there should be no such thing as a shortage. Mm-hmm. A shortage would mean that, people aren't allowed to raise the price. So as a commodity or as anything becomes, less and less in supply, theoretically in a free market, the price should rise. And as the price rises, the producers make more of it, more is entered, and you find some kind of price equilibrium after a while. And this works in a free market and has worked for centuries. The problem we have now is that it's no longer a free market. So without a free market, you do have supply shortages because the price isn't allowed to rise. And that is a huge problem. And then those in the know, who know what's going on, secretly load up on the real stuff as the price is kept low and the shortage is there. If they can get their hands on it at a certain price, they will. And that's why you see the U.S. Mint in their Silver Eagle production. At times, they've even stopped production altogether. Although the price was very low, they couldn't get any supply of silver because of the market distortions that were provided by the suppression of price, by the basically by the U.S. government and the U.S. Treasury and the Fed trying to control the situation. So yeah, and when you look at the gold to silver ratio over in history in the United States and around the world, it's been anywhere from 10-1 to 20-1, and it's kind of the proper ratio because back in the day, throughout history, that's about what it is mined at, what it's pulled out of the ground at, about 10 ounces of silver for 1 ounce of gold. That has actually changed over the year on both sides of the equation. Now they're pulling out a little less silver and more gold. So that ratio kind of got thrown out of whack a little bit. But the big thing that threw it out of whack was in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the introduction of silver and into the electronics side of it, the industrial side of silver. And now the majority of physical silver goes into industrial applications like, in your cell phone and in your computer and in your telephone wires and in your solar panels and in your car, all kinds of electronic industrial applications that use silver because silver is the best conductor of electricity out of all the metals. So the gold silver ratio should be going the other way. It should be going down, and yet the price manipulation has been making it rise to now it's, like you said, 80-1, 80 ounces of silver buys you 1 ounce of gold. But truthfully, it should be well below 10-1 right now. I think it will go there. I think the more people understand what has happened over the last 40 years with silver price manipulation, and remember, silver is consumed. And because it's used in such tiny amounts in every flat screen TV and cell phone, and it is consumed in these little tiny amounts that never get recycled, which is really interesting because gold's the exact opposite. All the gold in the world has been basically put into jewelry and stuffed into a vault. So as the amount of gold that is above ground and physically available grows, and the amount of above ground silver shrinks. I mean, it's still there somewhere. You just can't get to it because it's in 100th of an ounce in a cell phone that you lost somewhere on your hike in the woods. That silver will never come to market. All the gold is still out there. So yeah, huge distortion. I think before this is, as the manipulation ends, you'll see gold and silver for a while coming to close to parity, 1-1. 1 ounce of gold will be worth 1 ounce of silver. And that'll be really unique time because people will stop using it as in the electronic industrial form and start using it more as money as it should be used. I believe it's been money longer than gold has been money. It's been used as money. They call it the people's money. So we'll see. And it all goes together with when this system will crash and when the Fed and the U.S. Treasury, who currently uphold the system, and they buy stocks and they buy the U.S. dollar, and they're going to run it for as long as they can, and that's what we have been doing. So when they let it go, it'll be interesting to see where the true fair market value of gold and silver really is.
Are you looking at like any signs with gold and silver, like, okay, now the system's starting to fall apart and crack and gold is going to start to rise, silver is going to start to move up? Are you personally looking at any type of signal?
There's tons of signals that I look at with my work at the Road to Ruta, and the Road to Ruta it's a theory based on a set of publications that the Fed Boston put out, and yeah, there's a tons of signs. One of the really big signs is that there's these what I call truth bombs coming out, these revelations that people have always been going on. Our system has always been rigged. Our politicians have always been massively corrupt, but it was never shown to people. You weren't allowed to talk about this stuff in Congress or in the banks or at the Fed or on CNBC, and you aren't allowed to talk about all the rigging and manipulation and criminal activity that goes on in our government and in our markets. But now we're starting to see these revelations come out, and like in email exposures, and you're even seeing our justice system being questioned openly about their honesty, and that's key because people want to believe that we have the rule of law and we are a just nation, and just saying that we're exceptional, the American exceptionalism is real versus the reality of what really goes on behind the scenes without the rule of law, with all these connected politicians getting off with doing literally anything they want. Then the people start questioning, well, if our justice system isn't even you know, even they think they're above the law, then what kind of country do we have? And that's kind of part of what we're seeing with all these outbursts of riots, and the people are angry. But the key, I think, is the release of more of this information, more behind the scenes. Now, right now, it's, you know, the Democratic Party and the Clintons and George Soros kind of getting exposed. But I think real soon it's going to flop over to the other side, where the Republican National Committee will get exposed, and the Bushes and the hedge funds in Wall Street will get exposed, because they're all massively criminal. And once the people start seeing that, oh my God, it's not just, you know, the Clintons, and it's not just the Bush family and the Republicans, and it's everything to even half of Congress has been completely compromised, and they get payoffs all the time. We're worse than a third world country. And that's the kind of thing that the American people won't stand for, because we do have there's an innate feeling that we should be above all this. We should be doing it the right way. You know, this is America. This doesn't happen in America. Things like that. And I think the people will stand up at that point, when it's just so blatant, in your face videos of you know, Clinton talking about how, you know, she's going to overthrow some government and secretly sneak arms into Libya and things like that. Those kind of things that it's undeniable on both sides. And it's not just the Democrats versus the Republicans, although they like to show that. I think it's a fight between what I call the good guys and the bad guys, even within government. So yeah, it's really, there's a lot of signs, and you're going to get these truth bombs over the next couple of weeks and months. And these truth bombs will really shine a light on what's really going on behind our backs.
So what do you think is the biggest threat in America? You think the central bank is one of the biggest threats, or do you have any other opinion on who is the biggest threat in America?
Well, my research into the central banks, and yes, there are bad people within the central banking system. I do understand that, and that's a huge part of the control of the bad guys over us. And my friends at GATA and I had a kind of a falling out, not a falling out, but just a difference of opinion, because with my Road to Ruta stuff, I show and I outline exactly what the Fed is trying to do by creating so much money, so much electronic blips. And yes, the Federal Reserve System is not needed. It was set up as a con, basically, by the banksters back in 1913. I go through reasons why it was set up. It's really interesting. But yeah, we don't need a Federal Reserve. You know, we don't need debt money. We have a U.S. Treasury, and we have a U.S. Congress. Congress supposedly still has the right to print and coin money, and with the stroke of a pen, they can abolish the Federal Reserve System, meaning that all the Federal Reserve notes will go to zero, getting rid of all our debt. Yes, it gets rid of all our electronic assets as well, but it gets rid of all our debt, and all it takes is a signing of you close the Fed down. And something like that, a truth bomb about the Fed and about all the bad things that the Fed has done. I do think they have done bad things, but I also think they've had a secret agenda to run the system as hard as possible, soaking up all the benefits of fiat money before it crashes. I think Alan Greenspan implemented this policy back in the early 1970s with a couple other guys. Paul Volcker was involved. Arthur Burns, who was the head of the Fed back then, and Greenspan's mentor. And those who don't know, Alan Greenspan was one of the original computer programmers who wrote the very first computer programs to run the financial system. He literally was the creator of electronic assets. Not like Al Gore when he said, I created the internet. But no, literally, Alan Greenspan created electronic financial assets. He even blames himself for the Y2K problem, because those are the programs that he wrote. And that's the reason why everybody in the mid-80s was asking, why is the world's biggest gold bug, Alan Greenspan, being put in charge of the Federal Reserve System? This was in 1987. Everybody was confused as to what was going on, because Greenspan had always wanted to return to a gold standard. And through the work, the publications at the Fed and the work that I've done, I've exposed kind of a behind-the-scenes plot, just like in the Wizard of Oz, where the guy was pulling all the levers. This is the Federal Reserve Bank running the computer programs to run the system as long and hard as possible, build up your military, build houses, and run the monetary system to infinity, and then implode it and go back to a gold standard. And that's the plan that they have going on. If you look at the new $100 bill, it's all gold on the right side of that bill, and right above the 100, it's part of the Declaration of Independence that talks about overthrowing your government when they get out of hand, and that's kind of where we are.
Do you believe that the central bank, their whole agenda is it's not to improve the economy or help the dollar, get stronger?
Yeah. Nor is Congress. Every time they say they're going to balance the budget or get spending in line, it's a lie. They do exactly the opposite. And it has been the plan, because the plan was to, if you went back onto a gold standard immediately back in, the early 70s, or if you stayed on a gold standard, it would limit your ability to spend and build your infrastructure and build your military. So they didn't, and then they knew they would have to at some point, and that was the conclusion of the 1982 Gold Commission report that Ronald Reagan had established. Got all the smartest economists and gold bugs and people in the world and said, should we go back onto a gold standard? This was when inflation was going crazy, and Paul Volcker had to jack the rates up to 20%. And the conclusion was, well, we think what the gold bugs are saying makes sense, but we think also that we can get the budgets in line, and we won't have to go back onto the gold standard, and we'll have more control if we just do it the way it is. So we'll just keep going until it implodes. So you would think they would, try to keep the budgets in line. But if you look at the amount of money printing that's gone on since 1982, it's really shot off the roof. And that was what the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston said in these documents that I uncovered, is that the only way back to a gold standard, when you go off of it, is to run the monetary system and print as much money as possible and destroy it through overprinting. And that's what they're trying to do. At the same time, they suppress the gold and silver prices to keep the game going. They buy the stocks, they buy the bonds, they support the US dollar, and they can, with a computer, that's the ultimate power. You can click a mouse and do anything you want with the electronic price, because all our markets now are electronic prices of fictitious assets trading back and forth with each other. The Fed trading back and forth with itself even. And, Michael Lewis, had a great expose on the flash boys that do this stuff. And he kind of drew the line at saying, well, our government's involved in it, and they're the biggest flash boys in the world because they invented electronic assets. They invented the very first computer programs that went into the rigging of the markets. And that was Alan Greenspan working at the Council of Economic Advisors for Ford. And he's been behind the scenes the whole time, clicking his little computer. He's still computer programs today, although he's getting, he's up over 90, and you can tell by his interviews, he's getting a little, tired and is not as quick as he used to be. But he used to be brilliant. And no matter what people say about him, they called them bubbles, and they said, you never know what the guy's saying. That was his job. His job was to keep everybody off the clues and away from the fact that our life has been under control of computer programs since the 1970s. Every single market has been controlled, and now the end game was always to end that control, in the computer control of the markets. What I think they miscalculated, these people who have run the system for so long, is that we're the ones who are going to have to live through the end game of this. They should have ended it back in the 60s after Kennedy was taken out. They should have exposed all the criminals and had a come to Jesus moment in the United States. Now, here we are 50, 60 years later, and we have to do it. And it's not fair to us, but, it just has to be done. We can't keep kicking this can down the road with computer manipulation.
So, Bix, if they're looking to crash the economy, why don't they just let it go? Why didn't they let it go in 2008?
Well, I think the people weren't ready. I think the whole crash in 2008 was orchestrated by the Fed and by the Treasury. That was the plan. And then they, the bad guys, as I call them, like Hank Paulson goes in front of Congress and says, well, we need $700 billion. And then, obviously they leveraged it to 20 trillion or whatever they do in a fractional reserve system. But they went in front of Congress. And if you remember in 2008, the first answer out of Congress was no. They denied the bailout. The stock market crashed 50%. 3 days later, Paulson comes back and says, you have to give it or the world's going to implode. And then we did it. There weren't enough people to stand up and say, well, nobody understood about the evilness of this banking system and what was going on. And that's part of the reason why it wasn't allowed to go completely through, is that the people weren't ready yet. The people weren't ready to stand up against the powers that be and the banking powers that be. I think they are now. I absolutely think they are now. There's been movies, and if you walk down the street in America and say, what do you think of the big banks? They're going to say, I hate the banks. I can't believe we gave them a bailout. And now look at everybody on Wall Street who's making all this money, and we don't even have a job, and all our jobs are going to China. What is wrong with the country? And they're saying it now on the streets of like Milwaukee and in Chicago, and yeah, it's very scary about how that's all going down, and that's kind of I think that's being supported by the bad guys because they want the people to turn to them when this crash happens, not turn away from them. And turning to them would be reallocating money in the same proportions that they stay rich. So yeah, it's a hard time, but this is the transition. This is something we need to go through. So the banks will crash again. They will come to Congress again, not for $700 billion this time. It'll be more like $20 trillion. And then it's up to the people to stand up and say, no, we're not going to let them do this again.
When they do this, aren't the people going to say, hey, wait a minute? And I think you just said this, that, you did this before. Here we are again. You told us that everything was fine. We were recovering. And now the system's crashing. And you're saying that the people at this point will say, okay, no more. We can't have any more of this.
I believe that's what will happen. Now, here's the problem. Problem is that they, meaning the banks and the government, bad guys have got us so dependent upon the system for everything we do, for our to pay our bills, to work our day's work, to eat food, to have electricity. All that stuff depends on this banking system flowing properly. And if they don't get bailed out, it will not flow properly. Every single bank is dependent upon every other bank. That's why these banks are called too big to fail. And what it means is that if they fail, the rest of the banks will fail as well, and nobody will have anything on the electronic side. So people historically will always vote for themselves to get a bailout. The problem now is that the banks have stuck us with this problem. If we don't bail them out, we don't bail ourselves out. So that's kind of where it is. But if you think about it, what is the biggest problem, financial problem these days, is debt. It's not that people have too many electronic assets. It's that there's too much electronic debt out there. And a crashing of the banking system will get rid of the electronic debt as well as the electronic assets. So that'll be really interesting if the banks go to Congress, which they will, through the Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary, and say, that they need $20 trillion for this bailout this time. I think the initial reaction will be no. And then stocks, will drop 50% or 80%, and people will panic and say, okay, we'll give them something, but we need to stop what they've done before. And there's no way to stop it. It's either you bail them out or you can't, or you don't. You need to remove them. So if the same people are calling for the same thing, and then in the Dodd-Frank law that they passed, there was a provision added by Citibank at the last second that says for FDIC insurance, before anything gets paid out to the individual savings checking account or anything like that, they have to pay off the bank derivatives first, which is hundreds of quadrillions of dollars. So that provision, although everybody was jumping up and down saying, how dare they do this? They're guaranteeing their own bailout before us. That's not what's going to happen. They're guaranteeing that there is no bailout. That's what that is, because no way people are going to say, yeah, give the banks quadrillion dollars to cover their derivative bets, and then later we can get paid out for my, $1,000 savings account FDIC insurance. So I do think that the banks will come to Congress, and Congress will say no this time.
When they say no, what happens at that point? What happens to the dollar? What happens to people's accounts?
Gone. 100% gone. Yeah. That's why they're called too big to fail. Is that if they fail, the system shuts down. There's no 401k. There's no savings accounts or checking accounts. These are all everything you own electronically online that you see your balance or you get a statement in the mail. You need 4 or 5 credits to stay in business between you and that, and ever seeing that money, even if, what will money be if the Fed fails? Right now our money is, Federal Reserve notes, which is an IOU from a third party bank. And all these different credits, meaning, your Schwab has to stay in business, and Fidelity has to stay in business, and, Midland Bank has to stay in business, and it all revolves around the too big to fail banks. and the system and the music keeps playing. And even your stock accounts, when you buy a stock and you hold it in your 401k, most of the times your brokerage house does not go out and buy that stock. They just credit your account. And they've been doing it for decades. And at the SEC, they call them failure to delivers. When a company like Schwab or Fidelity will purchase you'll purchase a stock, but it will never be delivered to your brokerage company because there's so much going. It's like a game of musical chairs. Every day, every single day in America, over 300 million shares are not settled, meaning they take the money and they go gamble it themselves, and they lend it to people to use margin accounts. And if the system stopped today, there'd be 10 to 15 actual true owners of each share of stock. That's how bad it has gotten. So the bad guys, as I call them, they want the system to crash just as much as the good guys, just for different reasons.
So last time we spoke, you said that we're on track to collapse the second half of this year. Is your research still pointing to the second half of this year?
Well, truthfully, I first called the collapse in 2007 when I found the Fed documents, and then what was it? I think Bear Stearns went down first, and then Lehman, and then we got to 2008, and that was a moment of are we going to bail out the system or are we going to let it crash? And in the United States, Congress decided to bail out the system. Now, this time, I don't think we will have a bailout. And if you look at all the things that are happening, no matter what the stock market prices are, because the Fed buys that with a click of a mouse, it's the European sovereign debt that's collapsing now. And the big bank, the mother of all mothers, Deutsche Bank, the largest derivative holder in the world, they even this weekend said, we need a big collapse because the system is a mess. But yeah, they failed their latest stress test, although the European regulators said there's no such thing as pass and fail on this test, but they failed, and they're the largest derivative holder in the European banks. I don't know what the actual number is. Nobody really does. We're thinking about $60 billion or 50 billion euros or trillion with a T. But nobody really knows. And they say, oh, these are all offsetting each other. Well, that's all fine and dandy if they're offsetting each other. But if you go down, then, the other half of your $60 trillion derivative position will be defaulted on. So yeah, you go down, everybody else who owns a derivative goes down. So there is no real hedge in the derivative world anymore. So yeah, that's a lot of signs pointing there. And the United States is, we're holding things together by Scotch tape and computer market manipulation. And I think the plan is for the good guys and the bad guys. They both want it to crash before the election. And then it's like, all right, where do we go from here? That's the big question. And will these truth bombs that are coming out actually fully be exposed? Will we know everything? And I think to start a new system after this coming crash, we're going to have to know everything from every bank account a congressman holds in Panama or whatever place they hold them, to what has been done to us for the last 100 years. All the secrets that the government holds needs to be exposed for us to move forward. I think that's where we're approaching.
So when this thing falls apart, you're talking about a reset.
Well, no.
No?
A lot of people are talking about a reset. There's a lot of talk about like the NESR Act, the National Economic Stability and Recovery Act, that supposedly Bill Clinton signed in the 90s, getting ready for the crash after the dot-com stuff. And then you hear all about this hidden gold in Asia, and everybody has a different idea of how there'll be a reset of the system. And the people that are, saying, yeah, we need a reset are mostly people who have stuff. And so it's the bankers who want a reset because that keeps the percentage of their wealth in line with everybody else. Yeah, if you devalue all currencies by, 80%, they still keep their wealth because they own 80%. What I see happening is more organic, a crash in the banking system where all the banks go down because of the derivatives and the European bank failures, and they're all interconnected. And so there's no flow of money, and then a reallocation, not a reset, but a reallocation of money in the United States. That's what the Fed documents are saying in the Road to Ruta comics and the information that I've dug into coming out of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. they reallocated money, and the way they did it, and the way Alan Greenspan, I think, it has been promoting it, is you reallocate according to your Social Security balances. Because if you think about it, it pays off. The most important people are those people who have been, working the hardest over these past 50 years and are going to lose everything, and they don't really have the ability. So it's the old people that are getting screwed in the Social Security system that will have the most money because they paid into the system the longest. That's why they're not touching Social Security. But today you think, oh, what do you mean Social Security? You don't make anything off that. Well, if it's the only money there is, yes, you will. Whoever's got the most in Social Security will be very rich, because that will be, the new money allocated will be allocated according to who's paid into the system the longest. It is a way, but even the Fed in their documentation says, well, we don't know if the people will accept that even.
Will this be in dollars? I mean, what currency?
I think they'll be in dollars, but real dollars, not Federal Reserve notes. I mean, the United States, the definition of a dollar is about 1 ounce of silver. It's defined as grains of like 300 and something grains of fine silver. Yeah, we'll go back to gold, silver. I think there'll be a Bitcoin component as well. The United States and the CIA and the NSA are knee deep in Bitcoin, in assuring that nobody really messes with that, because it's going to be one of the alternatives. And you think of the United States in the beginning, we're all about the right of the individual. And if you look at Bitcoin, that's what that thing's all about. It takes government completely out of the monetary system, which is unbelievable invention and can be very powerful when governments fail. If you think about Greece, if everybody had a little Bitcoin account on their cell phone, when they went down, they wouldn't have had to turn to the EU for a bailout at all, and there would be no austerity in Greece. They could just use Bitcoin and go along with their lives and probably be massively more well off than they are today.
So you're saying that people should get into Bitcoin?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you believe in gold and silver and you understand that, it's not a long jump to jump over to Bitcoin. Yes, it's electronic, but it is not controlled by any government. It is not hacked. It's not hackable. Everybody has to approve every transaction. So it's very, people say, oh, people hide in the shadows on Bitcoin. No, they don't. Every transaction is out there. It's just, your name's not on it, but every transaction is out there for people to see. Amazing technology. And if you're interested in Bitcoin and you heard about it at all, or you think it's crazy, go onto YouTube and just type in any question you have about Bitcoin, because this is an electronic form of money that will be here for the next 50 years. And you can get in now. You will, I guarantee everybody listening will at some point be getting into Bitcoin. You can get in now, or you can get in 2020 or 2030, but it will be here. The infrastructure is being built right now. I know a lot of people in the industry, and it's huge. It's gigantic, and they know what's about to happen to our fiat system. So Bitcoin and gold and silver will be the most likely tools to move forward as far as going back to a monetary system. I don't see any way that you can get enough people to agree to some kind of revaluation, because the people who want that are the people who are screwing up our system right now. The IMF and the World Bank and the central banks of the world, they're all talking about resets and, revaluation of currencies. I don't think people will trust them at all, and they shouldn't trust them. So with Bitcoin, gold, and silver, you don't need to trust anybody else but what you have in your hand.
So will Bitcoin be backed by gold and silver, or is that
no need? There's no need to back Bitcoin.
Okay.
Bitcoin. The whole thing about gold and silver in the past, one of the many aspects of it is the scarcity factor, and that's why it's the only reason it works as money. It's scarce and it's durable. It's you can go through the list of things that make a good money. Well, on the scarcity aspect of it, Bitcoin is even better than gold and silver, because it is a defined number of Bitcoin that can ever be mined, which is 21 million coins. And it's divisible. I could give you a penny's worth of Bitcoin or a tenth of a penny's worth of Bitcoin today. So as far as Bitcoin needing to be backed by anything, it never will need to be backed by anything. Just like gold will never have to be backed by gold, and silver will never have to be backed by silver. They are assets. They are assets that have limited supply. We don't really know how limited the supply of gold and silver is. I think silver is much more limited than they tell us, and I think gold is much more plentiful than they tell us. I know gold is much more plentiful. It's not that there's 2 swimming pools full of gold. That is a fallacy that has been perpetuated by people like Jeffrey Christian from the CPM Group. There's massive amounts of gold. I'm not saying gold is overvalued or undervalued. I think it's massively undervalued in relation to fiat money, but there is a lot more gold, and the Fed documents show, kids walking up to a bank with 10 gold coins to cash in. Really interesting stuff. But you go back and all the hidden gold mines and Yamashita's gold, and there's been gold mined for a long, long time, and it's the De Beers family that came up with this. Supposedly they had all their researchers, tell the world exactly how much gold and silver there is in the world, and these are the people who rigged the diamond markets. So that was GMFS back in the 60s. And they came up with a number, and then everybody's gone off that number, and it's complete baloney. And the United States has a lot of gold mines that they aren't tapping yet. I believe they will come out, and the Fed documents, it's exactly what they say, that at some point we're going to be tapping these gold mines that we've been saving for a long time. But silver, I think, is the exact opposite. That's why I think the silver to gold ratio will go to 1-to-1. Is silver, they've had to do some things just to get physical silver, like shutting down the largest secret military plant that had at least 500 million ounces of silver in it just to get the silver out in the 90s. Really interesting stuff when it comes to silver. Nobody really knows, truthfully. Nobody knows how much physical gold there is in the world. Nobody knows how much physical silver there is in the world. But they do know how much Bitcoin there is, and ever will be. So that's that. I'm a big fan of Bitcoin. I own some of it. I own mostly silver, and then I think I have 1 ounce of gold.
So Bix,
just for fun.
When everything falls apart and you have your gold and silver, what do people do with it afterwards? They just continually hold it, or there's going to be a time and place where they say, okay, you have this gold, you can trade it in, this is how much it's worth?
Well, see, that then you're getting to a question of what is going to be used as money. I mean, if you're going to trade, you want to trade things that are overvalued for something that's undervalued. We're just talking about investment, not what you need to live or anything like that. But for investments, yeah, that's the idea. If you think your dollars in the bank are undervalued and you think buying a house is a great time, your dollars are overvalued and the housing prices are low, yeah, buy a house because it's going to change relative to each other. But the whole concept of selling gold and silver and when's the best time to sell, it all depends on what we use as money after the crash. Because 99% of the time in history, people have gone back to gold and silver because you don't need a decider. It has history. And in Asia, you can say, yeah, obviously they'll go to gold and silver because the people, that's where they keep their dowries and their wealth is in gold. So yeah, in China and in India, gold is a huge part of the culture. In the United States, we've been brainwashed into thinking that gold is a barbaric relic or whatever the term was, ridiculous. And, people will learn very fast. And the cool thing to be, looking out for in the next couple of months is everybody who's laughed at the gold and silver bugs, or everybody who didn't quite understand what was going on is going to be clamoring to get their hands on physical gold and silver. And they'll be coming to you for advice, and they'll be running down to their, jewelry stores and local coin shops, trying to get their hands on physical gold and silver. And the people who hold that gold and silver are going to be saying, no way am I going to give this up. Give it up for what? Give the pieces of paper. So I think the coin shops around the United States will shut down for a while. They're not going to, if you owned a coin shop and all of a sudden the system breaks apart and everybody wants to get their hands on gold and silver, would you give the people gold and silver for pieces of paper with the Federal Reserve note on it? No, they're going to shut up their shop and go take their gold and silver and retire on a desert island somewhere. So yeah, we're coming into some very interesting times, and the reason all this is happening is because the prices of gold and silver has been suppressed for so long. And we're not talking 15 years or so that Gad has been talking about it. I'm talking at least 50 years. Since 50, 60 years since the invention of computers. And then if you go back before that, hundreds of years, even before the creation of the Federal Reserve System. It goes back to, the opium wars in China. You can go back as far as you want, and throughout history, the manipulation of gold and silver and money in general has been ongoing, and it will continue after this next crash and after we go to something else. But usually after a crash, you have some times of relative stability with the monetary system because people don't trust anybody or anything with their money after it's been abused.
Bix, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
You can go to roadtoruta.com website, put your email in our email mailing list. There's some bunch of free articles. I send a lot of free information. I also have a subscriber section. And there's a free book you get with every email. If you subscribe to the email, you get a free book called Gold or Silver, Gold, Bitcoin, and God. It's really fun and people enjoy it and you can send it to your friends. It's a PDF book. So yeah, come on by.
Hey, Bix, thanks a lot for being on the Spotlight.
All right, Dave. Thank you.